Time for another edition of Paraphrase Power. This one is from an ACT reading section. So the first thing I want you to do is read these two paragraphs, try to paraphrase what you've read to get the main ideas and or main argument. So go ahead and read this one. The first paragraph of this passage brings up an issue, and that issue is that there are not as many beloved women poets as male poets. So for whatever reason, and there are probably many reasons, there are not as many women poets, and the question is asked, what can be done about this? And the second paragraph discusses a response. James Merrill, probably some sort of critic, talks about how Elizabeth Bishop handled this. And as you can see, she kept her work from appearing in women's anthologies. Better from her point of view to be one of the 40 or 40,000 best poets and have done with it. In other words, she didn't consider herself, Bishop, she didn't consider herself a female poet or a woman poet. She just wanted to be a poet. So she didn't publish her stuff in women's anthologies. She just wanted to be, not in that issue at all. She just wanted to do her poetry, publish in the same places everybody else did, and not call any attention to the fact that she was a woman doing poetry. As we move on, we see that the author himself or herself brings up, even though they may not want to, or even though this poet may not want to, consider herself a woman poet, we still can try to address this issue by specifically reading women poets of the past who have never been much read and discover whether or not they deserve to be. So that's our summary of what's going on in this passage. Let's go to the question. So go ahead and try number 3, and we will then talk about it. It may reasonably be inferred from lines 10 to 17 that James Merrill respected Elizabeth's poetry. What? So we have an inference question, but really, again, as with many of these inference questions, there's not really much inferring going on. It's pretty much just finding the evidence in the passage and finding the choice that best fits with it. So, James Merrill respected Elizabeth's poetry and or but what? So what does Merrill say? Merrill quotes somebody else who describes how Ms. Bishop didn't want to appear in women's anthologies. She wanted to be one of the 40 or 40,000 best poets and not deal with that whole gender issue. Now what he says, and he adds, if I raise the issue at all, is to dissociate her from these shop-worn polarities. In other words, polarities mean like opposites. So in other words, he is bringing up this issue not because he wants to call attention to her as a female poet, but to kind of agree with her, to dissociate her, to separate her from these polarities, right? The polarities specifically of men and women poets. So he is sympathetic with the way she is trying to see herself. So let's see. James Merrill respected her poetry and wished that reaction to her poems had not been complicated by gender issues. Yeah, right? So he is trying to dissociate her from these shop-worn polarities. He is trying to separate her from these gender issues of men poets and women poets and so on. So A looks pretty good, but was disturbed by her refusal to be included in women's anthologies. There's nothing here at all that states or even implies that he was disturbed by her refusal to be in women's anthologies. In fact, he kind of agrees with her. But she felt she should be more concerned with women's issues. Again, just the opposite. He is trying to dissociate her from that kind of thing, separate her from it. And was glad she was one of the 4 best women's poets ever. I mean, they don't even mention the 4 best women poets here. And yeah, just not mentioned. So the only one that's even close to mentioned or stated or implied is choice A. And that comes specifically from these lines right here, lines 16 to 17. So this one is A. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.